of Esau. Now, I've put a chart in with your lessons today, and the chart gives you a breakout of Esau's genealogy and Jacob's genealogy. And also it gives you some of the Abraham, and also gives you Ishmael's genealogy. If you look under Abraham, you'll see Ishmael's genealogy. Well, let's see, where do I want to start? What I want to do today, right just at the very beginning, so we can get through this, and I'm not certainly going to read all of the verses. They're not pertinent. If you want to study these names and study the history of these people, you can certainly do it. I'm afraid if I start on it like that, you'll be going to sleep, and I don't want you to go to sleep. Or you'll be laughing at me from stumbling over name after name after name. AI can read them. Yeah, but they won't read them right. You ever watch AI? You got a map and the AI is giving you directions. I have fun because when I go to the ranch, I go through Greenville, and as I get to the other side of Greenville, there's a road that's got a Louisiana name. I could say it. Baudier, whatever. Well, when AI says it, it is hilarious. I have to stop and laugh at the stop sign when it's telling me to turn left on, and it just goes off on 4 or 5 different names that it's trying to say. So don't trust AI. We've come a long way in history to get to chapter 36. And like I said, this is a turning point. We only have there's 2 genealogies that are recorded here that we have that we have chapters on. One is the genealogy of Ishmael, and the other is the genealogy of Esau. Let's go. Let me just bring us all up to date of the book of Genesis. How about that? We start with in the beginning. That's a pretty good start. But we start our genealogy really with Adam. And Adam had 2 sons. By the way, let me stop and preach a minute. Or teach. Adam had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. In the beginning, and I may preach on this too, but I will preach on it. But in the beginning, Jesus was the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. The whole book is about Jesus. And we find that Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. They were created in a perfect environment. So all the environmentalists that are looking for utopia, it's don't exist. It did exist. It don't exist. It will again exist, but it don't exist now. And God created them without sin. But He gave them a will. And He gave them a choice. He could have said anything. He said, 1, do not, and they did. You would have, I would have. And so they sinned, and God slew an innocent animal. I believe it was a lamb, to make clothes for them. And He booted them out of the garden. Now He has 2 children. He has Cain, his eldest, Abel, his next son. It appears that it could be every year. We're not told the dates or times. I believe it would have been in the spring of the year, as we have Cain bringing the crops that he had harvested and the vegetables or whatever that he brought to God. But Abel brought the sacrifice that he knew God wanted, and that was the blood of an innocent animal. He was taught that by his father. His father learned that because he sinned against God. And I believe that his forgiveness and his being kicked out of the garden he celebrated that by offering a sacrifice to God every year. The kids watched that and saw that. They knew it, right? And so we come to a time when Abel brings his sacrifice to God and Cain brings his sacrifice to God. Abel brings his sacrifice to God, and it is what God requested, what God requires is the shedding of the blood of an innocent animal. That's what Jesus did for you and I. Yeah. He brought the proper sacrifice, and God accepted it. Yeah. Abel, on the other hand, why should I do that? Look what I have done. This is what I have done. Yeah. I have created this. Matter of fact, understand something. Man can't create anything. Nope. Man cannot create anything. I've told you the story of the scientist that goes to God and says, I can create man. Yeah, I can create man. And God says, well, all right, have at it. So he goes and grabs a shovel and a bucket, and he starts digging up the dirt. And God says, what are you doing? He says, well, I've got to have these out to make man. God said, no, those are mine. Yes. Make your own. You can't take mine and make from mine. Man don't create. We talk about creating, but man don't create. God has already created, and we take what he has created and we make things. We build things, and we go on. Cain, in all of his self-pride, decided to bring his sacrifice before God, and so he brought his sacrifice before God and laid it out beautifully. I tell you, it was probably the most beautiful arrangement you would have ever seen in the history of mankind. And God rejected it. And God gave him an out. God gave him an out. He could have went back and got the proper sacrifice, just like Judah could have went back to Jesus instead of going and hanging himself and throwing the 30 pieces of silver away. He was not repenting because he was sorry for his sin. He was repenting because he got caught. And here we have the same situation. We have a situation where that man brings in his own righteousness something before God, and it's rejected. And what does he do? Instead of repenting of that, he kills the good man. We witnessed that this week. 6,000 years later, folks, nothing has changed. Evil tries to triumph over good. Nothing has changed. We try to hear, okay, we got to take away the guns. Well, you that tell the truth have got to stop telling the truth. No, I'm telling you, I'm being serious. You that tell the truth must stop telling the truth. You're divisive. No. Was Abel divisive? He just brought the sacrifice God asked. He hated it. And that's what we have today. We cannot let down our guard. We must raise the cross high. We must not be ashamed of the gospel of Christ. And so here we have... All right, here we go. We go back to teaching. God gave them a Seth. And that's what we're going to see happen today. One is set aside, another will rise up. Won't be the same. He'll be different. There's nobody like that. I watched last night Mark Levin's show, and he had interviewed Charlie in an interview, and I was spellbound by the wisdom that young man had that God gave him. I mean, he was going back to Aristotle and all these. I mean, it's like, and he knew their thoughts and he understood what they were saying. And he never went to college. No, he didn't have to go to college. He reads over 100 books a year. You don't have to go to college. God will raise up a Seth, an Enos, all the way down to Enoch, all the way down to Methuselah, all the way down to Lamech, all the way down to Noah. And then, and it's amazing, Adam lived all the way down into here. He gave testimony of the grace and marvelous mercies of God throughout the generations, and yet the world became evil and evil and evil and evil to such a point it had to be destroyed. And so Noah comes out on the other side, somewhere around Turkey. I don't know, I'll try to do a little drawing. And this is the Mediterranean Sea. And we have the Sea of Galilee going down into the Dead Sea, going down into the sea. We have the sea, the little lake of Hermon, on Mount Hermon. And way up here, Noah and the ark landed somewhere up in Turkey, what they believe. I'm not so sure it wasn't East Texas, but I think it was. But it was most likely there. The Garden of Eden certainly was in East Texas. But Noah had some children. Noah had 3 children. He had Ham. He had Shem. And he had Japheth. And through these 3 children, our genealogy goes back. Yes, sir. And we know that Ham committed a sin against his father, against God, and his son was cursed. What was his son's name? Come on. Canaan. And they settled down in this area here, all the way down to Liberia, Ethiopia, all the way down into the very south, Yemen, and all of that area. And that's where they settled. They are more of the darker complexion. Japheth settled in Europe. And the families, a lot of us will be of this family. Shem settled to the east. And we know that down here, Babylon, that we had a family settled down in here, probably almost Kuwait, was a family named Tarak. Shem and his family, Enos and several in his family, they came all the way down, and they settled, some of them settled down here. Out of this family, Tarak, there was a war going on in this part of the world, and out of this came his sons was Abraham. Anybody know him? Nahor and Haran. Haran dies down here. Tarak takes, and because Haran died, he had a son named Lot. Abraham adopted Lot and took him into his family. And so as these, because of the war that was going on and all, they moved all the way around up here. And don't I have a good map? They moved all the way up here into Syria. And from this, we know that God spoke to Abraham down here. Tarak, their father, was an idol worshiper. And from this, these are the family of Shem. And from this, Abraham is told by God to leave and go down into Canaan, into a land that I will give you. And so Abraham, actually, they're called Hebrews. And the name Hebrews comes from, the word means a crossing over. And as they crossed over the Tigris and Euphrates River, the people in Canaan called them Hebrews. What do we in Texas call somebody from New York City? What? Of course, Yankee. And so they were called Hebrews. And that's how they got that name, Hebrews. And so Abraham is called out, and he comes down. Of course, he goes to Shechem first down here, and then he begins to settle and begins to have a family. He can't have children. There's so many marvelous and wonderful things about the story of Abraham. And it was 100 years old. Sarah was 90 before they could bear a child. Well, Sarah says, I can't have a child, and I'm sure Abraham was pestering her. I'm 90 years old. I'm not having children. And Abraham is, as a matter of fact, Abraham, he got in God's face a little bit. And God started telling him what he's going to do for him, and Abraham said, wait a minute, I don't have a child. God said, I'll give you a child. And he told him he would. But through that, they had Ishmael. Ishmael was raised by Abraham to be the firstborn son, to take over his inheritance. And then God gave Sarah a son, called his name Isaac. The name Isaac means laughter, because she laughed at God when he was telling her that she was going to have a son. So now we have Isaac and Ishmael. The family of Ishmael, and we watched matter of fact, God met with Sarah at the well, and he promised her 12 princes. And so if you look at the history of Ishmael, he had 12 princes. He settled down in this part of Arabia, and then he settled over here on the other side of the mountain in the desert of Arabia. And that's where Ishmael, he settled in this area. Now we have Isaac. And Isaac needs a wife. Abraham sends back to Haran his servant, and his servant gets Isaac a wife. Now, the differences between Jacob and this servant of Abraham is so glaring. This servant was a faithful servant. He knelt down by the pool, the well, before going into Haran, and he praised God, I give my master that woman that you would have him have, God's choice. And he prayed, and I want a woman that'll come, that will go down and give water for me, and that she'll go back down and give water for my servants and my animals. specific. And here come sweet Rebekah. And within the next day, he was on his way back to Papa Abraham, to his master. And so Isaac gets a wife. She has twins. Isaac is 40 when he marries Rebekah, 20 years later before they have children. So now he's 60, and they have Esau and they have Jacob. And here we have another story of Cain and Abel. The differences in children. And folks, we see this and we watch this in our own lives and we think, am I the only one that's struggling with this? What do you think the family of the murderer, they're just a decent, as far as we can see, they're just a decent people. I mean, nothing wrong with them. They're not even of the same political persuasion as their son. Conservatives. And now, what has their son done? He has ruined his family's reputation. He had no respect for his mother and his father. I don't care what he has to say about it. I don't care how many tears he sheds. I don't care. Esau was that boy. Esau was that boy. Isaac should have raised Esau different, but he let him go. He was proud his son would go out hunting, and his son would be out for weeks at a time. Well, what was he doing? He was carousing around with the Canaanites. And so anyway, Esau marries, and he's at age 40, so now we have Isaac is 100. He marries 2 Canaanite women. He knew better. He knew better. Why would you do that? And the Bible says these 2 women grieved his mother and his father. They were a thorn in the flesh. They were idol worshipers. They were nothing. And then he gives away his birthright and all of that. And what we have in chapter 36 is the genealogy of Esau. And what we see is Esau grows up. And his father, at about age 120, 130, somewhere in there, he thinks he's going to die. He's blind, can't see. So he decides to give away the birthright. This is one of the problems I have with Isaac. And I love Isaac. He and Rebekah were great people. But he didn't train up a child in the way he should go. He didn't raise him up worshiping God. And Isaac, Esau just went out and did whatever he thought. And so Jacob plans, and I don't like the way all that chapter 34 went down, but he took the birthright away from his son, which it was his birthright legitimately because God told Rebekah that the older will serve the younger. And so that's our story. Esau decides to kill him because of that. And Jacob leaves and goes up to Haran, where he should go to find a wife, from the daughters of Shem. This is the one that God promised to bless. When you read the story, I don't have time to get into it. This is the one God promised to bless. And he goes, silly man, he goes and kisses the first woman he sees. Now, if I did that, I'd get slapped. Of course, that was many, many, many years ago. And God's choice was Leah. And we'll talk about that later. So what we have in chapter 36 is Esau, his family, and this will be the last we see of Esau. Now, we won't be the last we see of his family, because his family is Edom. And Edom settled down here. In this area here is where Edom settled. Actually, all the way down into here is where Edom settled. And this is where Esau settled. And this was the blessing that Isaac gave Esau. And this is what we see in the notes here. Behold, thy dwelling shall be with the fatness of the earth and with the dew of heaven from above. And thy sword shalt thou live, and thou shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass that when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break the yoke of his neck. And we have 5 minutes, so I want to go very quickly. The generations are listed here, and we have the names of his wives: Ada, the Hittite, Holabama, and the Hivite, and Bosmath, Ishmael's daughter. And these were the women that he married, and then we find the sons. And we're going to find something else out, that God promised Ishmael 12 princes, and Esau will have 12 dukes. And of course, Jacob will have 12 sons. I don't know what that means. I'm just telling you what they have. And so Esau took wives and daughters and things like that. Now, one of the things we see here in verse number I think it was verse number 8. Trying to think here. So he left. He took his wives and children and left. So what happened when Jacob came back from Haran after he had 20 years up here, and then he came back, he went over, had another 10 years or so. So Jacob finally come back to Hebron, where his father was, and he settled in that area. And Esau was settled in that area. When Isaac died, the inheritance would have been split. 2/3 would have went to Jacob. 1/3 would have went to Esau, right? And what we see here is that because Jacob's already had a huge blessing from God, a huge group of animals, of herds, and many herds of animals, and he gathered also that up from his father, it overtook that of his brother. And his brother left Jacob to inherit that area in Hebron and the Canaan area. And he went into Sodom, and he took that area in where the Horites were, the cave dwellers in this land, and that's where he had. So what's happening here is Ishmael is here, Edom is here, and then we have the Moabites and the Ammonites, who are the sons from the daughters of Lot. They are here and here. So you can see that Israel is surrounded by family, but the family don't like them. You understand what I'm saying? And so it's a. Somebody want to take a picture of this? It's a calamity of problems. Edom, when Israel come out of Egypt, Moses spoke with the leaders of Sodom and said, "Let us come through, brother. We won't harm anything." Now, there's 2 or 3 million people coming. I mean, you take all of Rowlett, Rockwall, we're talking about a lot of people. And he said, "We'll come through. Let us come through, and we'll go up the King's Highway." The King's Highway was here. The Intercoastal Highway was here. And so when people would come out of Egypt or when they travel back down, that's how they would travel. And he said, "Let us go through." And they said, "No." You can't come through. So then he had to go around Edom, and he runs into the Amalekites. Remember the pastor talking about Aaron and Hur holding up the arms of Moses? The Amalekites were from if you look in the history here, the Amalekites were from a bondservant of Esau's, one of the handmaids, and he had a child named Amalek, and that was where that come in. So if you want to read my notes, you can get the lesson. Other than that, you got what you got. God's good to us, folks. Let us never forget our precious Lord. Father, thank you for this wonderful day. I pray you'll bless these folks today, and I pray that you'll just use us, Lord, that we might honor you and glorify you. Bless this morning's service. Just be with us in a very special way now. In Jesus' precious